In a small rural town, far away from the noise of the city, there lived a man most people barely noticed anymore. His name was Elias. He was not young, not strong, and certainly not successful in the way people usually define success. He was simply still there. Every morning, Elias woke up before the sun. Not because he had big dreams to chase, but because his body had learned the rhythm of survival. The old wooden floor of his farmhouse creaked beneath his feet as he stepped outside to look at his land. The fields were dry, the fence was broken in several places, and the small barn behind the house stood almost empty. Years ago, this place had been alive. There were animals, laughter, and the sound of work being done with purpose. But one by one, things had disappeared. The animals were sold. The neighbors moved away. The laughter faded. What remained was silence and Elias. Holding onto a life that no longer seemed to move forward, people in the village spoke about him quietly. Not with cruelty, but with indifference. That poor man never leaves. He's still trying to make that land work. He should have given up a long time ago. Elias heard those words before. He had learned to let them pass through him like wind through an open window. Giving up sounded simple when you had somewhere else to go. For Elias, there was nowhere else. This land, this broken farmhouse, this quiet routine, this was all he had left that afternoon. This broken farmhouse, this quiet routine, this was all he had This was all he had left that afternoon. The sun hung low in the sky, painting the dirt roads in warm orange light. Elias walked toward the edge of town, not because he planned to buy anything, but because walking helped him think. At the far end of the road, a small livestock market had formed. Farmers were gathered, examining strong young animals. Talking about prices, futures, possibilities, Elias stayed at a distance. He already knew he couldn't afford what they were offering. Still, he stood there for a moment, watching the movement, the life, the noise. It reminded him of something he once had choices. Then, almost by accident, his eyes moved toward the far corner of the market. Away from the crowd. Away from the attention. There, tied to a worn wooden post, stood a horse no one seemed to care about. The horse was thin. Its coat lacked shine. One of its legs bore the marks of old injuries that had never healed properly. While other animals were being admired, this one stood quietly, its head lowered, as if it already knew what people thought of it. Elias felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't understand why. Maybe it was the way the horse stood apart from everything else. Maybe it was the strange familiarity of being ignored in a place full of people. He took a few slow steps closer. The seller noticed and let out a tired breath. "You don't want that one," the man said. "It's old. It's weak. Nobody's interested." Elias nodded as if he already knew the answer. Still, he asked the question quietly. "How much?" The seller hesitated, then gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. $1. For a moment, Elias said nothing. $1 wasn't much. But to him, it was still a choice between food for the week, or something that made no sense at all. He looked at the horse again. The animal lifted its head slightly, their eyes meeting for just a second. There was no strength in that look. No promise of greatness. Only quiet endurance. Elias reached into his pocket, and in that small, almost invisible moment, a decision was made, one that no one else noticed. One that no one believed in, but one that would begin to change everything. Elias walked home slowly, leading the horse along the dusty road that curved through the empty fields. The town faded behind them, replaced by long stretches of silence and the soft sound of their footsteps on dry ground. The horse moved carefully, stopping often as if every step required effort. Elias didn't rush it. For the first time in years, he felt no urgency to arrive anywhere. By the time they reached the farmhouse, the sky had begun to darken. The small barn looked even more fragile in the fading light. Elias opened the door and guided the horse inside. There was no special preparation. No new equipment waiting, only an old rope, a bucket of clean water, and a small pile of hay he had saved for himself. The horse hesitated before drinking, as if it wasn't used to being offered anything freely. Elias sat nearby on a wooden crate, watching in silence. He didn't feel proud of what he had done. He didn't feel confident. He only felt present. That night, sleep came slowly. Elias lay awake, listening to the quiet sounds of the barn through the open window. A soft movement. A breath. Proof that another living being now shared his space. The house felt less empty than it had in years. The days that followed were simple, repetitive, and strangely meaningful. Every morning, Elias cleaned the small stable. He brushed the horse's coat with careful movements, stopping when the animal flinched from old pain. He washed small wounds with clean water. He spoke softly, not expecting any response. The horse began to respond in its own quiet way. It stopped pulling back. It allowed Elias to come closer. Its eyes no longer carried the same distant look. But the village did not share Elias's quiet patience. When he walked the horse along the dirt paths near the fields, people stared. Some laughed behind their hands. Others shook their heads openly. "Why waste your time?" One man called out. "That animal won't bring you anything but trouble," another said. Elias heard them. Every word. Each one pressed gently against the doubts already living in his mind. There were moments when he wondered if they were right. Moments when he questioned why he had chosen more responsibility when his own life already felt heavy enough. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Elias stopped walking and leaned against the fence at the edge of his land. The horse stood beside him, breathing slowly, its head lowered. Elias closed his eyes. He felt the familiar weight of failure pressing down on him, the memories of things he had tried and lost, the years that seemed to pass without leaving anything behind. Then he opened his eyes and looked at the horse again. It was still thin, still slow, still far from strong. But it was standing there, still alive, still moving forward step by step even when the path was difficult. In that quiet moment, Elias understood something he had not been able to put into words before. He had not bought the horse because he believed it would become something great. He had bought it because, in some small way, he recognized himself in it. Two broken beings, moving slowly through a world that had already decided they were no longer useful. And yet, day by day, without any grand promises, something between them was beginning to change. Not in a way that anyone else could see. Not yet. The change was slow at first, almost invisible. But Elias noticed it. The horse began to walk a little farther each day. Its breathing became steadier. The dullness in its eyes softened into something calmer, more aware. For the first time since he had brought the horse home, Elias allowed himself a small, cautious hope. Not a dream. Just the idea that maybe his choice had not been completely foolish. Then, one evening, everything nearly fell apart. The wind rose suddenly, carrying dark clouds over the fields. Elias was inside the barn, fixing a loose plank when he heard a sharp, unfamiliar sound. It was the kind of sound that made the heart react before the mind understood. He turned just in time to see the horse stumble. Its weakened leg gave way, and the animal collapsed onto the dirt floor. The impact echoed through the small barn, followed by a heavy, frightened breath. Elias rushed forward. The horse struggled to rise, its legs slipping uselessly beneath its weight. Dust filled the air. Panic flickered in the animal's eyes. For a moment, Elias froze. He had known this was possible. He had known the horse was fragile. But knowing something and facing it are not the same. His hands trembled as he knelt beside the horse. He spoke softly, though he wasn't sure why. He had no training, no equipment, no money for a veterinarian. Only his presence, and the quiet promise he had made without words when he chose to bring the horse home. The storm broke outside, rain striking the roof in sharp rhythms. Water began to seep through small cracks in the barn, darkening the dirt floor. The horse breathed heavily, exhausted, afraid. Elias pressed his forehead against the side of the animal's neck. In that moment, something inside him threatened to break. Not just because of the horse, but because this failure felt too familiar. He whispered into the storm, into the darkness, into the weight of years that seemed to repeat the same story. "I tried," he said quietly. The horse slowly stilled its struggle. Its breathing softened. The panic faded into tired stillness. Hours passed. Elias did not move. The storm eventually quieted, leaving only the sound of distant rain and the slow rhythm of two beings breathing in the dark. When the morning light finally entered the barn, the horse was still there. Alive. Weaker than before, but breathing. Standing again with effort, supported by the fence, Elias stood slowly, his legs numb from the long night. He looked at the horse and then out at the gray sky beyond the open door. That night had not brought a miracle. It had brought a warning: whatever this journey was becoming, it would not be easy. And the choice he had made with a single dollar now carried a weight he could no longer ignore. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest Elias had faced in years. The storm had passed, but its message lingered. The horse could not be pushed. Every small improvement had to come slowly, carefully. With patience, Elias was still learning to find within himself. He adjusted his routine. Shorter walks, more rest, softer movements. There were days when the horse barely moved at all, and days when Elias wondered if he was only delaying the inevitable. One morning, a man from the nearby town stopped by the fence. He had heard rumors about the useless horse Elias had bought. After watching the animal move slowly across the yard, the man spoke in a tone that sounded practical rather than cruel. "You know there's a small local event next month," he said. "Nothing big. Just a gathering. Some people bring their animals. You could come. Maybe someone would take interest." Elias did not answer right away. The idea felt strange. Exposing the horse to the eyes of others again felt like placing it back into the same world that had already dismissed it. Still, the word stayed with him. On the day of the gathering, Elias almost turned back twice. The horse walked beside him, steady but slow, its presence calm. There were no expectations, no plans, just the simple act of showing up. The field where people had gathered was quiet, informal. Children ran along the edges. A few farmers talked about weather and work. Some animals stood proudly beside their owners. Elias felt the familiar pull of doubt in his chest. Then something unexpected happened. A young boy broke away from his family and walked toward the horse. He didn't laugh. He didn't point. He simply stood there, looking up at the animal with open curiosity. "He's beautiful," the boy said softly. The word caught Elias off guard. Beautiful was not how anyone had described the horse before. Others noticed the moment. Not because the horse suddenly looked different, but because someone had chosen to see it differently. Conversations soft. Glances lingered. The quiet presence of the animal began to draw a different kind of attention. Elias felt a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. Not pride. Not victory. Just the simple relief of no longer standing alone in his choice. As the sun began to set, Elias turned back toward home. The gathering ended without any offers, without any sudden transformation. Nothing dramatic had happened, and yet everything had changed, because the true change was not in the horse. It was in Elias. He walked back to the farmhouse with steadier steps. The land was still dry. The barn was still old. The future was still uncertain. But he no longer felt invisible. He no longer felt entirely forgotten. Sometimes, the smallest choices do not lead to loud miracles. They lead to quiet shifts. And those quiet shifts are often the ones that last the longest.